ancestors I'm especially interested in today are the Buddhist ancestors, the women or the non males. There, in those days, no one really knew. There were three genders in Sanskrit. So, you know, who knows? We don't know because the records are incomplete. The historical record is like looking at shards of broken glass. There's very little, but we can see into it by looking into our own lives because they are really part of us. And those shards offer a great deal. The I have two books I've been using. I started looking at these because we chant during the Ango, during our intensive practice, where we sit more and chant more. We've been um, chanting the names of the female or mother or non-male ancestors. Any way you want to describe them, they are our ancestors, and they truly existed. The historical record is clear. These were real people. There's this book, Susan Murcott, The First Buddhist Women, Poems and Stories of Awakening. Now, these have been worked over for a long time. There's still a lot of research to do on them, according to the historians. This is the Therigatha. This is the original forms of poems by these women who realized the way in their own lifetime. And some were ordained by the Buddha directly. The Buddha, I might add, means the awakened one. It's non-gendered. So, yeah, let's take that to heart. The first women who showed up all came from northwest India and Nepal, and they were led by Mahapajapati, whose name we chant. And she was the stepmother of Siddhartha Gautama. I think it's 5 years after he left home, became enlightened, 5 years after he got enlightened, she showed up with, they say, 500 women. No one knows the number. It was a lot. Okay, 500 means a lot of women showed up at the door saying, we want to ordain. Will you let us? And he said no. He said no repeatedly, in fact. When one of his chief disciples, Ananda, said, can women realize the way? Can they know their true nature? He said, yeah, without hesitation. He said that. Oh, but what about ordaining and being part of this community of monks? Nope, too much trouble. It's going to cause trouble back home. It's going to cause trouble everywhere. It's going to cause trouble with us, with all these young men. There are a lot of them were young. It's going to be a problem. We don't want to do it. So eventually he relented, but there were a lot of restrictions and bargaining. Mahapajapati was a tough woman. She was not going to take no for an answer. She bargained. She really fought for their place as a community of women ordained practitioners. So over time, more and more women came. They were ordained, and then at some point they could be ordained by women. The women themselves were empowered to ordain other women, which is a big deal. In many countries to this day, that's restricted. It doesn't happen. It's a battle that's being fought all over the world, actually, and there have been successes, but it's still difficult. Still difficult. So, who are these people? Well, they wore a kesa like I wear. The kesa comes from India. It's Indian. It's what the first women of the way wore. The second layer is Chinese men's outfit. And then under that, for me, it's a combination of Japanese and Turtle Island. It's, you know, it's Seisin calls it Japanese underwear, but we don't really use it as such in the regular way, regulation way. Um, she's happy that we could be a little bit more relaxed about all that. It's too many layers. I mean, right now I'm hot. These are hot layers. But in India, this was the garment. This was the main garment. People lived in these all the time. They didn't just go to their cottage afterwards and take it off and wear regular clothes. No, they wore it all the time. And Tibetan women practitioners do that still. So I relate to these people, and I got to relate more as I could read their stories, what bits we have of stories. Um, do a little bit here. The the Therigatha, this book, Theri means elder nun. It meant that they did at least 10 rains retreats. So they had been practicing quite a while. Many of them were ordained and were leaders. Um, in particular, there's Kema, who was a leader, and Upalavana also. Those two were considered the main teachers of the women's community. Kema was thought to be equal to the Buddha in her realization and her teaching. So there's a female Buddha from the time of the Buddha. I didn't know that. How many knew that? Yeah, it's important to know that there are others that are like us. There are others who, and we don't even know if they're all female, you know, and it's fine. I'm glad, in fact, that there are non binary people there too. Kema, when we chant this lineage, she's there's a group of 7 that are the main ones, and she's in that group. The last one in the Indian lineage is Upalavana. So I'm going to help you get to know those two. They're very important people, and I am just like blown away about how amazing they are. The Therigatha was gathered over 300 years from the time of the Buddha. It was oral first, and then later was written down. And then they disappeared from the historical record. So there, so many of the people who came. I'll get to Kema and Upalavana in a bit, but first, just to know the diversity of paths that brought people into the Sangha of non-males. There were some who had lost children and gone crazy. There are some who had been sex workers. There are some who'd been very high class, wealthy, and renounced everything to practice the way. And to go against the gender rules of the time was a big deal, a really big deal. So these people led, taught, and held positions. They had spiritual authority. They were trusted, and they really led their community. Here's I'm going to read you one of the poems so you get a feel for it. This is Vimala, who was one of the people. She says, or they, I don't know what Vimala saw as her own body, but intoxicated by good looks, my body, beauty, reputation, haughty because of my youth, I looked down on other women. I flashed my ornaments. I created illusions for people, all the while sneering at them. Today I collected alms, head shaved, covered with the outer robe, seated at the foot of the tree. What I get has nothing to do with schemes. All ties are cut, whether divine or human. I've thrown away all that fouls the heart. I've become cool and free. Isn't it beautiful? I've become cool and free. And then there are many more like these poems. If you ever get a chance to look at them, they're just inspiring. So back to Kema and Upalavana. Kema encountered the Buddha and the rest of that community when she became curious because she heard it was a really beautiful grove and she should go because all things beautiful were her thing. And she went there and she had a vision of the decline of her own body. It's old age, sickness, and death. And she dropped everything. This is like the foresights of the Buddha when he wasn't allowed to go out, and finally, when he did, he saw those sights old age, sickness, and death, and an ascetic. So she did too. So her experience is very much like Siddhartha Gautama's experience. So she moved into that community. Then she taught, she even taught like a king, which is a big deal then. People who were self-identified as women weren't allowed to teach men, but she did. She did. Then there's Upalavana. This is a person I relate to more. She also could confer ordination. She also had a high rank in the community. High rank due to her hard work and practice and realization. Upalavana was a beauty in her time. She was sought by many men. She wasn't interested. Who knows why? But she wasn't. Her father saw that and said, maybe you want to join the community of the nuns, the bhikkhunis. She said, yeah, I do. I do want to do that. She said, the Buddha should not have arisen only for the benefit of men. So, yeah, I do want to do that. So off she goes. And her poem includes this piece with Mara, the tempter, the one who wants you to stay attached in the world, to cling and have all kinds of fun stuff that will not last. Nothing lasts. Mara says to Upalavana, you're just a child standing alone at the foot of the flowering tree. You don't even have a companion. Aren't you afraid of bad men? So, well, this is really crucial in Upalavana's story. She actually went and lived in a hut to do solitary practice. And while she was there, a man she knew hid himself under her bed and raped her when she came home. And after that, the community of nuns said, no, nobody can go out and live in a hut alone. It's too dangerous. We can't do it. So what does Upalavana say to Mara when asked, aren't you afraid of bad men? Mara, if 100,000 men as bad as you came all together, I wouldn't move a hair. What can you do on your own? Mara, I'll vanish. I'll enter your belly. I'll stand between your eyebrows and you won't be able to see me. Upalavana, my mind is my own. I've walked the roads and discovered great knowledge. The Buddhist teaching has been done. She's saying that she's no longer able to be tempted by Mara. She's clear. Oh, yeah, wouldn't that be great? We all could be. So, Upalabana's story hits me. I used to work with domestic violence, with women in shelters, outreach to women on the street, and I myself have experienced sexual assault and various forms of violence when I was younger and in my household when I was young. So it's very important to know this that women have been, women in all non males, males too, to some degree, but it's way less, have been sexually assaulted in their lifetimes. So many have been. The numbers are like staggering. You don't even know what they really are because it's always underreported, especially for girls and especially for LGBTQ plus. Much higher, much higher. In males, gay men, 30% higher, and all other non binary, male identified, same thing. They're seen as targets for attack, that they're inferior, that they don't matter, they can be taken, they can be violated. When I was doing outreach for street women, street people, we called it street back in those days. No, we didn't say unhoused. We, we said homeless or street. Um, one woman who came to us had been attacked, raped, stabbed, and abandoned in an alley. So I was running a program where we went and worked in the parks with the Parks Department. It was a collaboration. And the folks would come and we would do parks work. We would, you know, weed, one of our favorite activities here. We would clean up trails and prune and do things so that the parks were more accessible and not overgrown too much and entangled. It's actually good for those trees and shrubs to have some care like that. So she came with us. She had not talked since the incident. Still didn't talk when we got to the park. Handed her a shovel. Here. She digs and digs and digs and takes all the fear, the anger, the violation, all of it into the ground. So when we regathered, we always ate together after. When we regathered, there was an enormous change, and she could eat a sandwich with the rest of us, and she could talk, and she could share humor. I mean, she was laughing. It was just a wonderful thing to see. So why is that change? I mean, digging in the earth and giving it to mom is a really good thing, but also the support, having the support of your friends, having the support of people who understand you, having the support of people who care. It's essential. It's really essential. That was true for Upalavana, who was a realized Buddhist teacher who had been raped. Where did she go? She went to her community, and her community healed her, helped her, and healed her. And she continued on for many years teaching. So these people who lived in about the 6th century BCE, before the Common Era, in the Buddhist time, and for probably a couple hundred or 300 years after, were lived very simply. one meal a day, which was an upgrade for some people at the time. They begged for their meals. They lived in community together, working on practice, working to see each other as enlightened beings that we all are. So they were not exactly poor, but it was a frugal life, a very frugal life. So what happened to them? Why didn't that community continue? The male monk community did to this day. Those who are non-male, no. So why is that? They, they weren't supported. The communities did not support them. Most of the male identified were supported by lay people, and most of them were female identified. The female identified did not support the female identified nuns, which is tragic. It's really tragic. And I take it as a lesson to really help and support each other, whatever our gender identification is, that we need to do that. I mean, it's great that we have some little shards of glass of their lives, like a broken mirror, that we can see into and take lessons from that. One of the things that really troubles me is something we've been calling since the 70s the feminization of poverty. Yeah. Most poverty in this world, I believe it's 70% are in female identified, they and their children. Often it's children along with. They have no support. Tossed aside. They don't matter. 65% in the world who are female identified are illiterate. So these are huge problems that we really need to address. In the United States, in Turtle Island, the biggest impoverished group is Native or Indigenous. After that, and the numbers are quite different. After that, it's Black, Hispanic of any race. Then white and Asian are about the same. But there are people living below the poverty line in all groups, any way you want to slice it. And then this is outrageous. How can we tolerate this? Why can people hoard wealth and leave basically the most vulnerable to have nothing or very little, die an early death? So as far as home leavers go, which the nuns were called, they weren't exactly like the male identified group, which often went at a younger age. The Buddha himself left wife and kids. He was still fairly young. He also had a harem. Did you all know that? And some of that harem became part of the first female identified community. There had been wars, so people left to become mendicants. To voluntarily simplify one's life, voluntarily drop chasing after wealth, voluntarily drop needing so much. That's something we can all do. You don't have to be a home leaver. And we can all work on changing that in our world. You have to find ways. There are many ways. Anything you do is fine. Upalavana is an important piece that she taught. And this comes to us through Thupten Chodron, who is she was once named Cheryl Green, and she founded Shravasti Abbey. She's been a major figure in reinstating ordination for women and non-binary. She was born very close to my own birth date in 1950. So Upalavana is talking to a group of young women in this story. We are young, beautiful, full of life. It would be hard to keep the precepts. Well, those precepts back then were pretty hard. There were, I think, 227 for men and 316 for women. Palavana said, if you break the precepts, you break the precepts. Just leave and become nuns. But if we break the precepts, we'll fall into hell. Palavana says, go ahead, fall into hell. Hell is a great place in Buddhism because it's not permanent. And we can also think about it as going into our shadows, our shadow sides, what we can't face. If you've harmed somebody, for example, and feel like crap, that's hell. It's really hell. So they were afraid. She was encouraging them to go beyond perfectionism and self-deprecation, to not let that stop us. She knew they are capable of awakening just as she could. I love that exhortation. So just go to hell. Just do it. You can come back from hell and you have another day to see into your own nature. So I love Upalavana. She's a toughie. I love that she says, if 100,000 men as bad as you, Mara, come together, I wouldn't move a hair. It's strong. It's great. My mind is my own. My mind is my own, and I am everybody. We're not separate. We're not separate from the world's poor, from the 70% of female identified who are below the poverty line. We're not separate from those who've been abused, violated. No matter what you believe your body's identification is, violation is violation. We're them. I am that woman I met long ago in the Bronx in a park who had been stabbed and raped and left for dead. I'm her. I still hold her to this day. It was so beautiful to see her break free, and give her troubles to Mama Earth. It's the best place to put it. And to join us, join each other in sharing a meal, sharing our lives. So, yeah, let's just all go to hell together. We can do it, and we can come back. We can come back from whatever thing it is. Let's see into it. So, how long am I supposed to talk?
As long as we're done with everything by about 12.
Okay. Yeah. I could actually go on for a very long time with all this, but I don't really want to. I'd like to keep the points fresh and not chat you to death. So there are some vows that I use. They're more they're kind of like the vows we will chant later, but these are more about our times now. I use this with the interfaith group I work with. They come from Joanna Macy. I vow to everyone to commit daily to the healing of our world and welfare of all beings. I vow to live on earth more lightly and less violently in the food, products, energy, and relationships. I vow to draw strength and guidance from the living earth, the ancestors, the living beings of all species. I vow and join in I vow to support and join the work to end violence and suffering and ask for help if I need it. I vow to have a daily spiritual practice that clarifies, strengthens, and opens the heart of compassion. I vow to walk on this earth in this way. So, so what is it to be a person who takes all this so seriously? Is it a joyless life? No, of course not. I have a beautiful poem by Rengetsu, who was a nun in Japan. Um, she was she had been born in a brothel and was an artist and did all kinds of things. She even was a martial artist, and she could take on anybody who might attack her in her hut. So yeah, she was cool. She writes this fantastic little poem. It's for autumn, so I'll say it. As a nun gazing at the deep colors of autumn, clad in black robes, I should have no attractions to the shapes and scents of this world. But how can I keep my vows, gazing at today's crimson maple leaves? Yeah, there's beauty when we clear ourselves. We see it. There's all the other stuff too, but let's not skip over the beauty, folks. You know, we're surrounded by this wonderful property in the original homelands of the Kumeyaay. The trees here support us, they give shade. They support the animals who also live here. It's like we have our permanent range retreat right here, sheltered as were the earliest Buddhist monks and nuns. You can hear the birds. You hear crickets too.